What is up, Baton Rouge, and welcome back to the Tiger Pride podcast presented by 225 Magazine. I'm Mark Clements, here as always with the black box of Jarrett Roser, and he's got the full-on pirate. Mike Leach coming to town, the pirate man. Get it! Is it past 5 o'clock? For Mike Leach, it is. We're recording this at 4. Hey, I'll allow it. That's fantastic. So you're really feeling the pirate, huh?
It's sweet tea from California Pizza Kitchen in the flask right now, so don't worry about what time it is. Yeah, man.
It's sweet tea time, baby.
Hyping up Mike Leach potentially coming to the SEC, different rumors for a long time, and finally makes the jump to come to Starkville, and now the Mike Leach era begins in Tiger Stadium at 2:30 on Saturday. So, I mean,
can you please wear that in the press box?
I feel blessed to be in that press box this week and be watching some SEC ball.
Same. I'm excited. So I had this question saved for the end, but since we're kind of talking about it, does this even feel like a game week for you right now? Like, to me, I still wake up and maybe because it's the fact that there's not going to be tailgating or not going to be the whole band, and it's going to be just like a weird apocalyptic football game going on out there. Like, it doesn't feel like game week to me yet, but I'm wondering if it does to you as we record this on Wednesday afternoon, only a couple days till kickoff.
One of my favorite stories I wrote last year about Joe Burrow kind of referenced how big football and LSU football was in the state, from beyond just what happens from start to finish of a game on Saturdays, just how much Louisiana embraced him and he embraced the culture and everything that goes with the football game. And so starting this year with so much less of that in terms of the lead up to the game and the partying and the community aspect, there's certainly still going to be some of that, but as you mentioned, will not be remotely what we're used to for a season opener. It is kind of weird. For me, it's been weird too, because I've still just been in my apartment most of this week having Zoom calls instead of actually over at football ops talking to people. And so that's kind of made it a little weird. I mean, we're writing about a game and there's certainly some excitement building, but I'm sitting in front of a rainy window every day on Zoom. And so it's not quite the same as what it would usually feel like. But I know this game is something that these guys have been waiting for months, and through the uncertainty, it just built that hunger. And now they've been watching other teams play on Saturdays for the past few weeks. And so I think even with a smaller fan base there on Saturday than what they're used to, you're going to see a lot of excitement from the teams out there.
Yeah, I think it's not going to hit me till when you walk into Tiger Stadium and you see football about to take place, I think it's going to be exciting enough to get me pumped. And I'm, again, a lot to be seen on and off the field, but I'm wondering about just how they're going to try to build the atmosphere of the stadium, whether they're piping in fight songs and music and still doing all the fireworks and trying to give it as much of a feel of a big-time packed house football game as they can with only 25,000 some odd fans in there. It's going to be a whole weird, unique experience for sure.
Some of those pictures of the fireworks at the Saints opener for an empty stadium were really weird to see from the press box. But, I mean, at least LSU gets that 25,000. Maybe you surprise everybody and you get Boosie or somebody in that 25,000 liven things up at halftime. I don't know.
Are you dropping some hints right now?
Not at all, man. I'm saying it would be cool. So
it would be very cool. You saw your boy Fat is up in Kentucky getting Boosie to become a Wildcats fan. Did you see that?
Yeah. I mean, what you going to do? If I can support the guys going to play ball everywhere else, Boosie certainly can.
I totally agree. I want to see Boosie up in Rupp trying to tear on the house a little bit with all those fans. Anyway, we got the Mississippi State preview coming at you now. We're going to start, though, first with some of the, I guess, news-ish stuff of the week. Of course, I think this came I said this last week when we recorded that there was going to be some news dropping either the day of or the day after we recorded, and, of course, it came right in that general time frame. Jacoby Stevens gets the number 7 with Jamar Chase opting out, and 2 number 18s, Chris Curry and Damone Clark. So I guess first, your initial thoughts, and I think you actually asked Jacoby the question in our Zoom the other day about how he was kind of one of those guys that was a front runner for 18. And I mean, there was so much stuff. I mean, from Jacob Hester talking about it at the last year at the parade and everything, and to all this stuff he's done in the off season, even before COVID, visiting schools and stuff like that. And he's always just been one of the more outspoken and kind of the leaders of the team. I thought he was prime for 18. 7 does seem fitting. I thought it was going to go to Stingley, but that seems to be maybe waiting in the wings a little bit. What was your first thought when you saw Jacoby as 7 and not the 18 that we all kind of thought he would be?
So there was a little bit of surprise to that for me because of the anticipation that he would be 18. But what was more interesting to me, both when the video dropped and when I asked that question on Monday or Tuesday, which I was actually ready to ask a different question, but my internet started getting kind of funky, and so I figured I'd say something easy so that as long as he heard the number 7 get through, effectively. And both times, though, his answer sounded awful 18-ish. He talked a lot about how he viewed that number and the way he discussed number 7 for him and his family. And I mean, he referenced sort of the nature of 7 and that being a significant number, sort of some religious aspects, and just 7 representing kind of a completeness. And then obviously he mentioned Patrick Peterson and looking up to some of those former Tigers in 7, and that being a reason why he wore 7 when he was younger. But everything he said in terms of how it's more than just making plays and being a leader, it sounded like everything that we've heard everyone say about the number 18 since 18 began. And so that was kind of interesting to me. But at the same time, I know a lot of people jumped on the idea of Stingley as 7 even before Jamar was. And I'd always kind of mentioned that was not necessarily as likely to happen as people were anticipating, and that do not be surprised if Sting is in 24 his entire LSU career and just sticks with that number 24 and the significance that has for their family having worn that number and for Derek Jr. having worn the number throughout his career. So with Sting out on 7 and you're looking at the options for guys to honor with these 7s and 18s, I think Chris Curry and Damone Clark are 2 guys that you looked at in that same conversation, maybe on the heels of Jacoby a little bit, but as really deserving potential number 18s. And so I don't know how that conversation played out with Jacoby, if Jacoby specifically said he wanted 7, or if they talked about this would be a way for all 3 of them, or how it played out. But I think certainly 3 leaders end up all getting numbers, and maybe that's not exactly the case if Jacoby takes 18 and then Damone can't because they're on the same side of the ball, knowing that Sting is also not likely to take 7.
Yeah, it's a cool story for both 18s. Not that I know a ton about their personal lives. I know the 18 probably goes far beyond the stuff that I'm going to say and stuff that happens on the field and locker room, that kind of thing. You look so ridiculous right now.
I feel like I look drunk because my depth perception where I'm supposed to be looking is so off because of this eye patch.
I'm also wondering if when we get like half an hour into this thing, if you're going to just keep rocking, your eye's going to be like a lazy eye after you were an hour deep into this thing. But for Damone Clark, it's cool to have a Baton Rouge guy who obviously grew up around the program and knows kind of the history of it. It was cool for him. And then obviously the Chris Curry, the first thing that pops out is the fact that I think a lot of people, I mean, he was asked this question. He was a flat out answer about transferring, and he said like never once crossed his mind. And that was like a very short to the point answer from him. But I think a lot of people assume that whenever he didn't, LSU brought in John Emery and Ty Davis Price, that it was kind of maybe the writing on the wall for Chris Curry, only to see him go out and shine late in the year last year when he was called upon. And so, again, to fight through adversity and get to that point, and then for Damone to be kind of the leader of that defense in the middle, that linebacker spot, also a Baton Rouge guy. Good to see both of those guys. And just it just by default makes you feel more confident about those 2 guys and their positions within the team, which we'll kind of get to later. But Coach O mentioned that Chris Curry would be one of the first, would probably be the first back on the field. So just a lot of interesting layers to that. And I want to get your thoughts on those 2 guys as the 2 18s.
I think they're great. I mean, they're both guys that have waited their turns and have stepped up when necessary. And I mean, just been very team first players throughout their entire time at LSU. And even before that, you hear about their work ethic Damone, obviously a local guy and everything that he meant to that Southern Lab program, but you hear this story often about Chris Curry signing with LSU and then immediately going to work out, and just sort of that work ethic that his grandfather and his parents and his family and community really as a whole helped instill in him, and what this opportunity at LSU means, and now this opportunity to be number 18 and be a leader for this program. I think Jacoby was a guy that people looked at as obvious of a choice for 18 potentially as any, and these were two guys that, again, were just right there in the mix, and I thought made a lot of sense if it wasn't going to be Jacoby. I thought these were two guys as likely as anyone else on that roster, and I think we expected them certainly to be leaders on this team in that sort of not necessarily statistical capacity anyway, and I certainly expected Damone to be among the leaders in the middle of that defense as one of the more experienced players coming back as well. Chris, we talked about in sort of the preseason offensive breakdown. You don't know what to make exactly of how the carries play out over the course of the entire season, but Chris is certainly in that mix. A lot of people didn't expect him to be the guy that carried the rock as much as he did in the semifinal, and then when everything's on the line and they're playing Oklahoma, he's the guy that they go to 16 times for 90 yards, and it kind of showed where he was and his progress and the trust that this team, his teammates and coaching staff have in him.
And I'm looking forward to seeing both of those guys on the field Saturday. And then the next thing I had on the rundown was the LSU depth chart, and I'm looking at their running back spot now, and they just have a straight line of at the one spot of Chris Curry, Ty Davis Price, and John Emery.
Was that I think that might have been a mistake, because usually they just put the oars like every.
Yeah, this is just a straight, very tightly done line, but they even have like their weights below it instead of the normal. It was an interesting little formatting error, I felt like, and it was one that was more fitting to me than where they listed Jontre Kirkland at like 814 pounds or whatever he says. Oh, wait, I missed that. Yeah, 814. Man, these guys put on some weight, huh?
As much as I talk about the meaning of, the importance of Glenn Logan packing on 30 pounds from last year to move inside and be a big tackle for that defense, if Jontre busts out there as a wideout at 814.
Especially, hopefully he didn't drop any of that speed, man. It'll be a bulldozer running out there. Anything on that depth chart besides Jontre's weight jump out to you? What?
Not really. Ali Gay as the starting defensive end right off the bat, I think is the closest thing to a surprise that we necessarily had from the depth chart. And even that, we went in knowing that Ali was going to be someone that had opportunities early to make an impact on that defense. And even if he was behind Trevez Moore, he was going to get a lot of reps on Saturdays. And now, even with him listed as the starter, there's a lot of talk about Trevez is still going to get pretty close to even reps. And so I don't know how much to worry about that necessarily. It was the biggest surprise, but that's only because there were very few surprises, if any.
Yeah, I think it all kind of shaked out how we anticipated and thought when we ran through the offense and the defense the last couple of weeks. The O-line looks kind of like what we said: Dare Rosenthal, Ed Ingram, Liam Shanahan, who Coach O had some nice things to say about this week. Chasen Hines, right guard, Deculus, right tackle. That was kind of the biggest thing I was looking for, I think, was the O-line, and then you mentioned the D-line overall, the two D-ends, and then which D tackles. And Coach O said today, was it today or did I watch it today? I don't remember, that Neil Farrell is back, but we'll probably need to work up to, I guess, kind of football shape to get a few more reps. So the main three guys you're going to see at D tackle will be Apu Ika, Glenn Logan, and Joseph Evans. With, I guess, a little Jaquelin Roy, some of these freshmen in there, then Neil Farrell getting his shots. But yeah, I think it kind of worked out the way we thought. And I'm also excited to see John Emery and Trey Palmer listed as kick returners if they get a shot to actually return one, which seems not as common in the modern game. But we've been waiting for Stingley to bust one as a punt returner last year, so he's back there again. But then I think Emery and Palmer as two kick returners is two exciting guys to watch.
Oh, very explosive guys in the return game for LSU. And I'm interested to see – I think John and Trey are two guys, and I mean John Trey, an older guy too. So that's basically broke his name up into compounds of other Louisiana guys. But John Emery and Trey Palmer are two guys that I'm very interested to see this year overall, return game and on offense, because they arrived to Baton Rouge with as much talent as anyone a year ago, and have kind of had some hangups that have put them behind a few of their teammates. But this year is an opportunity for them to, if they're locked in and able to take a step forward, to really break out with everybody that left for the draft after last season. Those two guys could really seize a small opportunity or a medium-sized opportunity and overtake some of those other teammates and make the most of it. And that would make LSU that much better, because there's not a lot of players on this roster who are more explosive than those two, and we've just been waiting to see it for a while.
And then I wanted to go into some of Coach O's takeaways from his press conference this week. We talked about Chris Curry. That was one thing I thought kind of stood out, that he mentioned he'd be the first one out on the field as a running backs, which to me doesn't come as a total surprise. Like we said, we kind of thought those reps would be distributed relatively evenly. So he'll be first. The next thing was the three biggest things that were kind of concerning him going into week one. And he mentioned tackling, ball security, and just making clean subs, getting the right personnel packages in and out on the field. To me, out of those three, I'm the one that I guess could be the biggest red flag, maybe the wrong word for it. But again, ball security is kind of what I'm keeping my eye on. And not necessarily with the running backs fumbling, but I guess a lot of it just in general, the turnovers and kind of the communication of, play actions here, making sure Miles doesn't turn the ball over. And we'll get into sort of our prediction for this game overall. But to me, that's one of the biggest things that would keep State in this game is turnovers and giving them some more opportunities to unleash that pirate offense of Mike Leach. Out of those three things that Coach O mentioned, does anyone stand out to you as kind of one that, again, not worrisome, but you're going to keep your eye on and kind of see how it plays out?
Did you say eye singular because you are still fighting for me to wear the eye patch on Saturday?
No, I didn't, but that's a great point, and I'll say that I did.
So you mentioned ball security in terms of the turnover margin. I think that's obviously always huge for any team, and for LSU, that's been something they've hung their, and this is not intended, but their pirate hat on so heavily.
Oh, no. You had that waiting.
No, my head's too big, so I couldn't put it on because it messes up the bandana.
I thought you had like a box of props waiting to just like slowly one-liners drop them in. Which wouldn't surprise me.
So it's been something that the Tigers have hung their hat on so much since O took over, and they've been among the best in the country the past few years, and that's been a huge part of the successes that they have had, is to limit their turnovers first and foremost, and then also force some turnovers along the way and just win that margin. And so I think that's really big in any matchup, and certainly for LSU, and certainly for an LSU team coming into this game with so many new guys who are going to be called upon. You don't want to start giving away short fields to Mike Leach and company to get some points and get some momentum going and put some young guys out there for the first time for LSU in a hole to have to make back up potentially, or to be in any tighter of a set of circumstances than is necessary in a series that has been tighter than LSU would probably like in recent years. Last year was one of their closer games. They had some trouble punching some possessions in early, and Mississippi State was right there with them for at least the first half before Joe Burrow and company were able to put a little bit of distance to it. And so I definitely look at the turnover margin. And one of the other ones you mentioned that I guess I do kind of keep in mind, that tackling has been something that, particularly early season matchups at times, we've seen LSU have some issues with some missed tackles and bad angles in some games where suddenly you're frustrated because a game's a little bit closer than you want it to be, and now you're opening a season against a Mike Leach air raid offense. And so there could be a few times when if you're not communicating well on defense and making tackles securely, that suddenly the Bulldogs are in the end zone on a play that should have been kept for much shorter, and you end up with a lot of the same problems in terms of a little bit more of a back and forth game than you would ideally like late in this opener.
And Coach O, when he touched on the tackling, it's just a matter – I mean, you obviously can't tackle every day in practice, going to the ground full on, or you're going to have a lot more injuries. Then factor in just the weird offseason that they've had overall. I can see why that is a challenge. But then just to tack on to all of this, that we've talked about this whole time leading up to this football season, which has been kind of in question for a while, is just having to prepare for a team like Mississippi State, which hasn't been great. But then you throw in Mike Leach, and so now you're taking State's old roster with this new Mike Leach look to it offensively, taking San Diego State's defense from last year where they pulled defensive coordinator, and having to watch all these different films about what guys can do and what Mike Leach might do with certain guys. It just adds all these different elements to it. And like whenever you and I previewing LSU, a team that we know fairly well, we've had trouble just kind of ironing down how we think certain things will go. I can only imagine trying to look at Mississippi State and try to break down what LSU expects on Saturday. And that's what another thing Coach O talked about, is just all the different things they've had to watch in the film, they've had to break down leading up to Saturday, just again to tack on to this weird offseason that's already been kind of a cluster.
Yeah, the first game of the season is always an interesting outing to see what exactly you're looking at from your own team, but also the opponent that you're trying to game plan for. Even a team that does not have nearly as much turnover as either of these teams in terms of personnel and coaches, there are some challenges there because some things will change over the course of that offseason. And then you factor in for LSU preparing for Mississippi State with everything that you mentioned and having to consider the coaches coming from everywhere. It definitely makes it that much more challenging. You bring a guy that has been one of the most highly regarded offensive minds in the country for years, and Mike Leach down from Wazoo, to suddenly have SEC personnel to work with. And so I think there's going to be probably some interesting, transitional growing pains to grow through with Mike Leach taking over this program and getting some recruiting classes in and whatnot. But they're going to have the opportunity to do some things down in Starkville with everything he's done elsewhere. And now suddenly you have the opportunity to bring some SEC talent into the mix. And so very interested to see how not only LSU but Mississippi State looks, and how LSU reacts to that, considering the difficulties that you mentioned in trying to game prep for them, not only from a football standpoint, but with everything else that has happened to kind of limit things along the way.
I'm interested to see your earring up close and personal in this thing. Can you show it off a little bit? Look at that. Look at that gold.
It's real. It's totally real. I thought you were going to say to see it up close and personal on Saturday again. I thought you were just still.
I'm laying the foundation. So watch this transition though. That icy earring keeping you cool. You know who else can keep you cool? AccuTemp. Your heating and AC MVP of your household is AccuTemp. As the official heating and AC partners of LSU Athletics, AccuTemp Services is your coach for proper HVAC maintenance. AccuTemp is offering a Tiger tune-up for just $99 to keep your home comfortable through any season. Beat the clock and get it half price by texting halftime to 31996 during halftime of all the LSU home games this season. Again, text halftime to 31996 during halftime of LSU games this season. AccuTemp, service to the highest degree. And speaking of those degrees, that'll lead us right into this Mississippi State depth chart and kind of the overall preview of what LSU is going to face on Saturday. You mentioned Mike Leach and what he's done at other programs. And I was looking up some kind of what happened at Washington State when he took over, because that program was a mess. They were 2-7 before he took over in 2012. The first year Mike Leach was in charge, the record didn't improve a ton, but they finished 9th in the nation in passing. In 2013, they were 4th, and then in 4 of his next 6 years, they were number 1 in the nation in passing. And so you talk about this air raid offense of Mike Leach. That's kind of what I'm expecting to see overall, although I'll get to Kylan Hill and kind of the element that he draws into this that I think could be interesting. Right now, I don't know if it's been officially announced. I don't think it has, but I think everyone believes KJ Costello, the Stanford transfer, will be the starting quarterback. He threw for 61.1% last year, 1,038 yards, 6 touchdowns, and 3 INTs in 5 games. So question for you is, do you expect the same general thing we've seen from Mike Leach at all these places he's been, this Texas Tech, Washington State air raid? Or do you think taking over a team like State and the SEC with a little bit different, not only players that he's working with, but defenses he's going against, do you think it'll be a little bit more balanced? Or are you saying full on typical Mike Leach?
I think he's trying to dance with the offense that brought him here as best he can. It's going to be, as I mentioned, a little bit of a transitional period, I believe, as he is still just getting started with a program that he took over less than a year ago and hasn't had a chance to bring in fully his personnel and kind of plan on the recruiting trail to recruit for his system. But at the same time, there are a lot of athletes in Starkville that he's going to have the opportunity to get the ball to in some space. And you mentioned Kylan Hill. He's a guy that is so well respected around the SEC, both on and off the field. And last year going into this matchup, he was someone that Coach O and the Tigers talked as much about as maybe any playmaker on that Bulldogs offense. And now he's back again. And I think that he's a player that obviously we've seen him be involved so much in and out of the backfield. And I think he's going to be a player that Mike Leach has an awful lot of fun utilizing in a variety of capacities throughout this year. And so Kylan is somebody that I'm watching on Saturday closely if I'm LSU's defense. And then throughout this all SEC season as somebody that can, really put up a lot of yards and points for the Bulldogs as they do try and kind of gear more toward what the future will look like in Starkville with the Pirate Man at the helm. And so, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I think they're definitely going to try to throw the ball around and kind of keep up the legacy that we all know and I think to some degree love or at least appreciate from Mike Leach through the years. But we've seen, you mentioned that first year at Wazoo, and that's been kind of how it's gone for Leach through the years too, is there are some struggles a little bit early on as you just transition from the old regime into his.
Kylan Hill also last year caught 18 passes despite finishing, what do you say, second in the SEC in rushing behind?
Third in the SEC.
Third in the SEC. Also caught 18 passes with a touchdown, which the point I was trying to get to was I think he'll do a lot more of that this year, just given the fact of what Mike Leach's offense can do and kind of his skill set. Other pass catchers for Mississippi State, they lost 4 of their 5 targets from last year, but Osiris Mitchell is kind of their lead guy. He finished with 430 yards on the year on 29 catches with 6 TDs. If there's one reason that I think I'm feeling optimistic for LSU to feel pretty good in this game is despite as good as Mike Leach's offenses can be, like you said, year one is usually a few growing pains as he's getting his system established. But also there's one spot that I at least personally feel comfortable or confident in LSU in. It's their secondary as a whole. And so if you're already having to replace 4 of your 5 pass catchers and Stingley is one of the guys covering whoever your new pass catchers are, just by default, I don't care what offense you're running. You got to feel pretty good about LSU's matchup-wise, man for man, who they'll be going against Saturday.
As long as you take care of the little things and execution, as we mentioned, tackling, taking good angles, that's some things that even against some, I say inferior, I don't want to sound like I'm knocking Mississippi State or even some of the Southeasterns or Northwestern states, et cetera, but some teams that LSU should beat in years past have made some plays because of just some sloppiness from some really talented football players on that defensive side and in the secondary. And so if those guys go out there and are able to take care of their business, they're certainly, I think you're far more confident in LSU's secondary than Mississippi State's pass-catching cores from a straight personnel standpoint. So we'll see how it shakes out. And I don't know if we're transitioning to kind of the flip side at all yet, and I should mention this now, but on defense, I don't know that Mississippi State's defensive front group is – there's some talent still there, but it's not the same type of group that is necessarily given LSU fits when Mississippi State has done so in years past in this matchup. So I think there's a lot to love matchup-wise for LSU. You just got to kind of wade through some of the uncertainty of it being a season opener and all these weird circumstances off the field as well.
Yeah, the last thing offensively I wanted to touch on before we flip to the state defense was their O-line, which ranked 13th in the SEC and 93rd nationally, allowing 31 sacks last year. And they're having to replace two starters, one of which is Cole Smith, LSU transfer. And then, fun fact, this is from Cody Worsham, so shout out to Cody. KJ Costello's NFL passer rating last year, assuming he is a starter, his passer rating last year when he had time was 103.2, so pretty good. And when he was under pressure, it was 18.3.
Yeah, it was not good.
Big yikes. Big yikes. So this all kind of comes down to, I guess, going up against LSU's defense. You already feel good about their secondary, and the one question mark I guess at least I've had personally, is who's going to rush the passer, and those two defensive ends, whether it's Ali Gay, Travis Moore, Andre Anthony, whoever it is, you're going up against what was the 93rd ranked defense and offensive line in the country last year, two of which are now being replaced by an LSU transfer and a redshirt freshman at left tackle. So I don't know if you can get pressure on Costello and he's thrown to a secondary that you feel that strongly about. It seems, like you said, matchup wise, it seems pretty good for LSU.
I think getting pressure on either quarterback is going to be huge on Saturday for these teams to have success. And I feel better about LSU's pass rush against Mississippi State's offensive line that you mentioned has not necessarily been strong and now comes into a new season without two of the leaders from last year's group than I do about this Mississippi State group that I mentioned is not necessarily at that same level as I've worried about some in the past coming into matchups with LSU against an LSU offensive line that I think is not going to necessarily be the best LSU offensive line that we've seen through the years, but I think is going to be pretty solid, have the opportunity to be one of the better, through recent years. So I really watch the matchups up front a lot. I think it's huge every week, and certainly this week is going to be a pretty determining factor for a quarterback in Costello, who you mentioned the stat has been not good under pressure compared to what he does when you're able to let him sit back there and pick you apart. And then on the other side, Miles Brennan, who as long as he's been around is now the guy for the first time at LSU.
And speaking of that, the defensive line for State, the one thing that they do have is just some size. They have three different 300-pounders they can throw out there. Jaden Crumdy, Nathan Pickering, and Marquise Spencer. And he started all 13 games last year at defensive end. So, again, not the group from
group.
–
It's not necessarily the one
2 years ago.
Exactly, on par with the best in the country.
Right. It was they had two top round 10 picks, whatever it was, a couple years back. So that is definitely an area, and I feel like it's like a cliche coach's thing to say watch the O-line versus D-line matchup, but I think that really is going to be big in this game when we mentioned the pressure on Costello and Miles Brennan, and this kind of this new look LSU O-line overall. And then kind of moving back a little bit, they lost 5 of their top 7 tacklers last year, but Errol Thompson is back. He had 84 tackles. He was their leader last year, and he's back in the middle of that defense, kind of holding it down. I'm really curious to see how this LSU offense functions against State's defense, mainly in the passing game. You mentioned last year some of the plays LSU did not make early in the game and kind of kept that one close. State's defense ranked 97th in the nation, giving up 246 passing yards per game. Good news for them is a lot of those guys are back this year and kind of have gone through those growing pains. So I think if there's one factor that I'm watching that could be not necessarily an advantage, but a spot where State could hold LSU in check a little bit, it's maybe with this passing game that has had to obviously replace Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Clyde, some of the O-linemen, Thad. And even though we have guys that we've talked about this whole offseason that we're excited about, whether it's Terrace, Eric Gilbert, we think Miles is going to do pretty well. I think there's just a lot of things that kind of you want to see it on the field for a week before you feel, too confident in it. But I think that's a spot that I'm going to be watching that I think State could keep this game close if their secondary plays well and put some pressure on Miles. This
is a series that even last year, Joe Burrow and company are putting up 50 burgers all over the place, and they're held out of the end zone early, and next thing you know, they're only scoring 36 points, which was actually the most that they had scored in this series since 2013. They'd been held down against Mississippi State compared to what they'd been able to do against some other teams. And even last year, with that prolific record-setting offense, not one of their better performances. When you talk about the memories of that game, there's a big pass play that kind of helped spark the offense a little bit, and then there's Joe Burrow's butt is kind of what everyone left Starkville talking about last year.
That was that game, wasn't it? Yeah.
And so you can't take for granted what this Mississippi State defense can do to kind of hold LSU a little bit into check with so many new faces, a new quarterback, and him trying to get the ball out to a lot of new pass catchers, including a couple of true freshman starters at tight end and one of the wide receiver spots. And we'll see how many other new faces are out there playing meaningful reps that Miles Burns trying to get the ball to. But all starts with keeping him clean and giving him a pocket to kind of work from and feel comfortable with. Fortunately, they're at home and they're not in Starkville in a normal year dealing with all those cowbells and whatnot. But watching how that offense does against a defense that has had success against LSU through the years is definitely a key watching point for Saturday afternoon.
For whatever reason, in my dumb little head, I guess maybe just because there's so many unknowns about the defense in terms of personnel and system that I've just felt more just innately comfortable with how the offense is going to look. But the more that I look at the matchup-wise, what they're going to face Saturday against State, I feel a lot more confidence in the defense and their ability to not only get pressure on Costello, but when he gets the ball out, I think even though they'll probably be able to string a few drives together here and there because it's going to be a lot of passing that you have to do, a lot of passes you have to defend, and Mike Leach is smart enough to put together a few dink and dunks here and there and get something going. But overall, I think LSU's defense could have a big day and cause some problems for this offense with some of the guys that they're trotting out there. And the offense is just going to be kind of see how it progresses, and a lot of unknowns, but a lot of potential, I think, with that LSU offense.
This defense is going to be really good. And I think on Saturday, you're going to walk away from the game against Mississippi State. If I had to throw some money on it, and you're going to be walking away and having some names like B.J. Ojolari, Ali Gay, Jabril Cox, Mo Hampton, probably at least 2 or 3 defensive players that you're seeing for the first time, or at least the first time in meaningful minutes. Obviously, Mo played some there in November when Grant Delpit was dealing with some injury and kind of had some moments that opened some eyes. But in terms of new players or young players, I think you're going to leave with a few that really catch a lot of attention and all of a sudden are fan favorites right off the bat. And on offense, I think there's going to be some opportunities for that as well. But we're recording this on Wednesday afternoon. On Wednesday morning, I finished writing a piece that talked a lot about, as much as we are trying to put the Joe Burrow era and everything that just left LSU in the rear view and not make any comparisons for this group and let them be their own group, I think there's a lot to remember from the fact that the Joe Burrow and company group in 2018 took some time to find their rhythm and really start to click. And so as much as this group doesn't have to be what that group was at the end of its historic run, I think there is some wisdom to take from the fact that some patience might be necessary before they really get into their rhythm and find their own way and do start writing their own story, as Miles mentioned. I don't think that what we see on Saturday from this offense is going to necessarily be indicative of what we're seeing from them in November. Certainly very interested to see where the starting point is, but they're going to be an ascending team overall, and I think a lot of it will come down to the chemistry that offense builds week to week.
Yeah, it sounded like a really obvious and dumb statement, but really I think Coach Joe made a good point when he said that they were much better at the end of Joe Burrow's time here than they were at the beginning. But like you said, just something to keep in mind when you're watching this offense, that we all know it's not going to be what it was last year, but look 2 years ago to when Joe first started with this offense. And if LSU can kind of keep that track, and then not to look too far into next year, but you just look at how the team is going to progress and kind of build and work in that rapport. Yeah, it'll be fun to watch. I think, like you said, there's a lot of talent offensively, a lot of super exciting weapons for Miles to throw to. What do you kind of keep your?
Oh, I was
Go
gonna
ahead.
say,
Go
by
ahead.
no means am I writing them out of a playoff or national championship
Right.
pick this year. I think that it's important to realize that you're not looking for Joe Burrow from January 13th and that offense to be here right now, and that it took some time for them to click. But I mean, as they talk about writing their own story, maybe that's not the same record-setting dynamics of 2019, but maybe they bring home a title in their first year out there, and that's part of the difference in terms of how it's written.
Before we get into predictions, just wanted to get a couple things that you're kind of keeping your eye on Saturday. We touched on a few things today, just going through the kind of the breakdown of the game. But what's like the main thing you're going to be watching for Saturday, and things you kind of, I don't know, expectations you would like to leave Saturday with?
Yeah, I think a lot of it we've hit on just different areas, and I know I mentioned the battle in the trenches on both sides. For me, I'm interested to see on offense LSU's tackles. Austin Deculus, they talked about as being much improved last year, but now he's going to have to carry that much bigger of a role in this offense and this offensive line as a returning starter. And then Dare Rosenthal, a guy that has all the potential in the world, has some experience from last year, but is he the guy now that they know he can be, or is it going to be a little bit of a work in progress still as the season goes on? If those two guys are strong this year, I think this team has some really big opportunities. And so those are two that we didn't mention as much by name other than going through kind of the depth chart rundown that I'm interested to watch. And then on the flip side, we mentioned a lot of those pass rushers, but I'm just interested to see some football at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's exciting. And I think I'll let you answer this too, but Eric Gilbert is one of the guys that I've been most excited to watch as a true freshman in a while. I mean, I guess Stingley also, but I guess offensively, I haven't been this excited to watch a true freshman. We've had two different LSU linebackers come tell us that he could be the best linebacker to ever play college football. And I don't know if they meant that directly or just kind of it came out of their mouths, but that's to have two different guys say it in the span of a week is pretty damning. So,
and I'm telling you, there's some guys behind the scenes that are not current players but have seen some practice work that are older guys with that much more perspective on what that statement means that say that that's every bit the truth, that watch out because he has that opportunity.
That's nuts. So I'm so excited to watch him, and I'm really pumped to see this running back group pan out. I think you have a lot of different skill sets, but a lot of talent there, and I think it could be a really exciting group. A lot different than what Clyde offered last year, just in terms of, again, three guys versus one guy who did a little bit of everything. But I'm excited to watch. I'm excited to watch that group and Eric Gilbert, and I wanted to see who, I guess, what position or spot or player you're kind of most excited to keep your eye on and see shine Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, all those guys that we mentioned. Eric Gilbert is somebody that the expectation is so high for, and I think similarly to what we've had, a couple of guys, including Stingley, come in and there's so much hype, and then they at least live up to it, if not more so. So it's going to be a lot of fun to see the beginning, because I think it's going to be a fun ride overall. And so to watch those first steps of the college level is going to be really intriguing.
Gilbert's kind of different too, though, because I feel like the big names that come to my head are like Stingley, who's a cornerback, Fournette, a running back, Peterson, another cornerback, like these, more high-profile positions, I guess. Just it's a different dynamic to watch a tight end come in with this much hype, and it's just different. It's
not very often that a freshman tight end is one of the sexiest names of the rundown through the roster. But when you're being compared to potentially the greatest to ever do it historically, and you're being talked about in the same breath in terms of your size and athletic ability as Calvin Johnson, remembering everything that he could do, and the list goes on. It's pretty impressive.
It was really tough to put a numerical score on this game with, I don't have to say it again, but just all the things we don't know about either one of these teams and the weird offseason. I think LSU, to me, can go one of two ways. You can go a lot like last year's game is kind of how I foresee it going, is be relatively close as these two teams not only feel each other out, but kind of get their own things, own wheels turning. I have LSU winning 38-24. I think both offenses will find some rhythm at some point, and then I think LSU will probably pull away a little bit late. That's where I have it. Although it does seem, after you mentioned LSU's struggles against State's defense historically, I don't feel as confident with a 38. But that's what I've written down, so that's what I'm gonna go with. 38-24 LSU.
Yeah, I am trying to determine whether I think LSU breaks 30 this year again, or if we look at another year where they're in the 20s and kind of fighting the Bulldogs off. But I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe the defense comes up with a big play or two that sets up a couple shorter fields and, if not, points outright, and say that LSU wins 34-20.
Okay, same general ballpark. Yeah. Well, that'll wrap up this episode of the podcast. Be sure to follow Jarrett on Twitter for all your Pirate needs, at Jarrett Roser. Follow me if you want pictures of Jarrett in the press box as a Pirate, at Mark Clements 225. And, of course, all the Facebook 225 Magazine brands, facebook.com/225 Magazine, Instagram and Twitter at 225 Baton Rouge. Find the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Google Play Store, Buzzsprout. We have it everywhere. Thank y'all for listening. Defend the booty, swab the poop deck. What other pirate puns do we have?
I don't know. I'm already thinking about what role play I can pull out of the closet for next week.
That'll be this year's theme, since we can't do food. Jared's got to dress up every week. Thank y'all for listening, and we'll see you next week.